Within the grand temple of Thebes in Egypt, amidst the flickering torchlight, where shadows clung to the colossal columns like vengeful spirits, Pharaoh Ramses IV paced the marble floor. The year was 1155 BCE, and Egypt's empire teetered on the edge of chaos. The once mighty borders were under siege by Libyan invaders, leaving the great halls of Thebes echoing with the cries of the wounded and the dying. Ramses, a man whose face was etched with the lines of endless wars, felt the weight of his ancestors' legacy pressing down on him like the desert sands. His body, once strong and impervious to pain, now ached with the scars of countless battles. But it was his soul that tormented him the most, a raging storm of duty and doubt. He had inherited not just the throne, but the dark rituals whispered in the scrolls of old. Rituals that demanded the greatest enemies of Egypt be punished in the afterlife, just as they had been in life. These rituals, born from the fear and anger of a people, had ensured their survival through centuries of conflict, allowing pharaohs to capture the essence of their vanquished foes, binding their ka to eternal torment, and empowering the king with their captured strength. Yet, as Ramses gazed upon his captive, the Libyan warlord Pharaoh, chained in the temple's inner sanctum, a flicker of humanity stirred within him. Pharaoh, a fierce leader with eyes like burning coals, had led raids that slaughtered Egyptian villagers, his blade drinking deeply of innocent blood. But in captivity, he revealed a man torn by his own demons, a father who fought for his people's survival, whose love for his family was as fierce as his hatred for his captors. Now, stripped of his power and dignity, he awaited his fate with the stoic bearing of a true warrior. "You call this justice, God King?" Pharaoh rasped, his voice a gravelly echo in the dim chamber. Ramses turned away, his fists clenched, remembering his own lost son, slain in the sands of war. The wound of his absence festered like an open grave, twisting the pharaoh's resolve with guilt and grief. To mummify Pharaoh alive would absorb the warlord's strength, fortifying Ramses' rule, but it would also stain his ka with eternal guilt. And as Ramses grappled with his conscience, the high priest Amenhotep approached, his lithe frame shrouded in linen robes, his face hidden behind a mask of ritualistic paint. Amenhotep was a gaunt figure whose eyes seemed to hold the secrets of the underworld. Years of performing the sacred horrors had carved lines of sorrow on his soul, leaving him a hollow vessel haunted by the screams of the damned. "The gods demand it, my lord," he intoned, his voice trembling like a reed in the wind. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of tradition and the promise of divine favor. Ramses nodded, his jaw set, sealing Pharaoh's fate. And with that, the fate of two men, intertwined by blood, war, and now death, was sealed. As the temple guards dragged Pharaoh away, the Libyan's defiant gaze locked onto Ramses, a haunting image of unbroken spirit amid impending doom. The air thickened with the scent of resins and fear, the walls seeming to weep with condensation, as if the Nile itself mourned the atrocity about to unfold. The embalming table lay before them, an altar of linen, wood and stone, its surface smooth from the passage of countless souls. It was here that the essence of men was captured, their fleeting lives distilled into eternal torment, and tonight it would claim another victim. Pharaoh struggled futilely, his muscles bulging as he strained against the chains that bound him, his mind racing with thoughts of his distant family, a tragic farewell unspoken. The priests moved with practiced precision, their voices chanting ancient words of power that echoed through the ages. Their every move was a step closer to the abyss, a descent into the heart of darkness that lay at the core of their beliefs. One priest held aloft a staff, adorned with the head of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of the dead, his visage a chilling reminder of the fate that awaited them all. With a sudden jerk, they stilled their chant, their gazes fixed on Ramses, awaiting his command. The pharaoh's heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic tattoo that mirrored the approaching doom. He knew that once the first stroke of the embalmer's knife broke the skin, there was no turning back. Taking a deep breath, Ramses uttered the fateful command, his voice resonating with the finality of death. With reverence bordering on reverence, the priests began their gruesome task, their hands moving with the grace of surgeons skilled in the arts of life and death. First came the removal of the internal organs, their placement in canopic jars, each vessel guarded by one of the 4 sons of Horus, gods of protection. The process was one of meticulous care, a macabre dance of life and death, of preservation and decay. As they worked, the temple's torchlight flickered, casting elongated shadows that writhed like serpents on the temple walls. Each flicker seemed to mock Ramses' faltering resolve, reminding him of the irreversible path he had chosen. The sight of the flayed skin of the abdomen, of the exposed intestines, stirred something primal within the pharaoh, a revulsion that warred with his sense of duty. But there was no turning back. The ritual had begun. The priests, their faces obscured by their ritual masks, continued their grim task, their movements a testament to their years of training. The removal of the brain, the careful preservation of the body, each step bringing them closer to the final, horrifying climax of the ritual. As they worked, the chants of the priests filled the temple, their voices rising and falling in a mournful symphony that seemed to lament the fate of the living and the dead. It was a sound that transcended mere ceremony, a sound that spoke of a world where death was not an end, but a gateway to an even greater mystery. The room fell silent as the last of the internal organs were removed and placed in their protective vessels. All eyes turned to the priests who stood before the embalming table, their hands poised above the still living form of the Libyan warlord. The silence was heavy with anticipation, a tangible presence that seemed to suffocate the very air within the temple's walls. One of the priests raised a small knife, its blade gleaming faintly in the torchlight. The air grew still, the silence deafening as the priest made the first incision, a shallow cut across the abdomen. A collective intake of breath echoed through the temple as the first stroke broke the skin, severing the bonds of mortality and opening the gateway to the unknown. The priest's hands moved with a swiftness born of years of practice, their movements precise and efficient as they sliced open the belly, revealing the entrails within. The sight was both repulsive and mesmerizing, a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the lengths to which men would go in their quest for power and immortality. As the gurgling sounds escaped the warlord's lips, the priests continued their grisly work, their focus unwavering, their movements precise. They extracted the entrails, one by one, placing them into the waiting canopic jars. Each jar was a miniature shrine, adorned with the visage of one of the 4 sons of Horus, each son representing a different aspect of the afterlife. The priests moved with a grim reverence, their bodies swaying slightly as they chanted in unison, their voices echoing the rhythm of the ancient ritual. With the entrails removed, the work shifted to the outside of the body, the priests smoothing the incisions and preparing the corpse for the final stages of mummification. The air grew thick with the scent of resin and spices, a desperate attempt to mask the stench of decay that permeated the temple. The priests worked tirelessly, their movements a ballet of death and rebirth, of decay and preservation. They were artists of a macabre craft, their canvas the human body, their paint the natron salts, the linen wrappings. Slowly, painstakingly, they transformed the corpse into a mummy, a vessel to be sent on its journey to the afterlife. The process was a long and arduous one, a test of endurance and faith. But the priests did not falter. They worked through the night, their movements steady, their chants unwavering until finally, as the first rays of dawn pierced through the temple's gloom, they were finished. Before them stood a mummy swathed in layers of linen, its face hidden behind a mask of painted linen, its body adorned with amulets and charms meant to guide its journey through the underworld. The air was thick with the mingled scents of spices, decay and dust, a fitting testament to the ordeal that had just unfolded. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the temple floor, Ramses stood before the completed mummy, his gaze fixed on the figure before him. In the fading light, the mummy seemed almost ethereal, a spectre of the past, a whisper of the future. Around him, The priests murmured their final prayers, their voices echoing the ancient words that had guided their actions since the ritual's beginning. With the ritual complete, the assembled company prepared for the final journey, the procession to the burial chamber, where the mummy would finally be laid to rest. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence broken only by the rhythmic chanting of the priests and the shuffling of feet. As they moved through the labyrinthine corridors of the temple, each step carried them deeper into the heart of the earth, closer to the realm of the dead. Finally, they reached the burial chamber, a vast, dimly lit cavern where the final rites would be performed. Here, in the cool, musty darkness, the living paid their respects to the dead, acknowledging the inevitability of death, the continuity of life. The priests, their voices echoing in the vast chamber, performed the final rites, their movements precise, their words echoing the ancient texts. They invoked the gods of the underworld, beseeching them to guide the departed soul on its final journey. As the priests chanted, Ramses stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the sarcophagus that awaited the mummy. It was a grand structure, adorned with hieroglyphics that told the story of the deceased, a monument to a life now ended, a legacy now enshrined in stone. With reverence, the priests placed the mummy within the sarcophagus, each movement imbued with meaning, each gesture a step toward closure. The chamber was filled with the scent of incense, the air heavy with the weight of tradition, the murmur of prayers, the rustle of linen. As the last of the priests finished their ritual, the chamber seemed to sigh, as if sharing in the solemnity of the moment. With the burial complete, the assembled company slowly filed out of the chamber, each person carrying with them the weight of the ritual they had just witnessed. The day had begun with dread, and as the sun climbed higher in the sky, the shadows of the temple seemed to grow shorter, offering a glimpse of hope amidst the darkness. Though death had been the central theme of their ordeal, life too had found its place in the cycle. For just as the pharaoh had absorbed the essence of his enemies, so too would he continue to live, forever linked to those he had vanquished and those he had loved and lost. The ritual was over, but its echoes would resonate within the halls of Thebes and in the heart of the pharaoh, long after the last torch had been extinguished. And so our story continues. Amunhotep carefully inspected the desiccated remains, nodding curtly to the other embalmers. It was done well, though the work had taken longer than usual, and now his lord Ramses would come to claim the prize of their labor. How the foolhardy monarch had insisted on this dark ritual, a twist of perversity, perhaps to prove his strength, or maybe to sat his lust for ever more power. Whatever the reason, the task had fallen to them, the servants of Ra, to make flesh of spirit. Yet even now, as always, they had honored their oath and preserved the form. Now the great house would be whole once more, its fragmented pieces melded back together, and when it walked, it would stride forth with new vigor. Ramses would be pleased. But the Lord had grown strange and cruel in the last years, far from the bright young pharaoh who had ascended the throne, and the servants of Ra could only wonder at the source of this darkness, whether it sprang from the queen mother, that viper, or the boy king's advisers, who stoked the flames of ambition until it consumed all reason. The great temple of Ptah in Memphis, deep within its bowels, where the air was a suffocating veil of myrrh and salt, the flames sputtering as if recoiling from the horror. There lay Kafel, strapped to the stone slab, his chest rising in ragged breaths, his body already numbed by potions that dulled the pain but sharpened his terror. The embalmers, silent figures in white, moved with mechanical precision, their hands dipping into vats of natron, the crystalline powder that would desiccate the living as it did the dead. Ramses stood vigil, his robe stained with sweat, his mind a whirlwind of justification and remorse. He had ordered this to harness Kafel's warrior spirit, believing the enemy's essence would flow into him, strengthening Egypt against future foes. But as the salts were packed against Kafel's skin, blistering and burning, Ramses saw his own reflection in the warlord's agony. A pharaoh deformed by power's demands, his soul as twisted as the bandages uncoiling before him. Amenhotep chanted incantations from the Book of the Dead, his voice a monotonous drone that masked his inner turmoil. He had once been a healer, devoted to life, but service to the throne had warped him into an instrument of death. Each granule of natron he applied felt like a betrayal of his vows, his dreams haunted by the faces of past victims, their eyes accusing him from the deep. What? Why do the gods require such cruelty? He whispered to himself, his faith cracking like parched earth. Kafel, meanwhile, endured the torment with gritted teeth, his mind fleeing to memories of his homeland, the vast deserts where he had ridden free, his wife and children waiting in vain. His conflict raged. Pride in his resistance clashed with the despair of failure, his tragic fate sealed by a war he never wanted. As the embalmers sliced shallow incisions to drain his blood, replacing it with resins that seared like fire, Kafel let out a muffled cry, his body arching in futile rebellion, a haunting vision of life ebbing into eternal limbo. Ankhesan Patan, Ramses' queen and sister, entered the chamber, her presence a fleeting light in the gloom. Her heart was a labyrinth of love and horror. She adored her husband, yet despised the rituals that darkened his rule. "This will destroy you," she pleaded, her voice breaking like fragile papyrus. But Ramses, his eyes shadowed with determination, turned away, knowing her words rang true. The queen's own body bore the marks of inbreeding weak bones and miscarried heirs a mirror to the dynasty's decay. As she fled the scene, tears streaking her kohl, the embalmers wrapped Kafel's limbs in linen, layer upon layer, entombing him alive, his breath's shallow gasps through a reed tube. The chamber walls, adorned with hieroglyphs of judgment, seemed to pulse with the rhythm of his fading heartbeat, a somber portrait of power's insatiable hunger devouring the innocent and the mighty alike. Ramses watched, enthralled and horrified, as the living corpse before him became a thing of painted wood and linen. But despite the grotesque spectacle, a dark thrill surged through him, a heady draught of power mixed with fear. Was this the secret to immortality, to become a god by conquering even death itself? He had taken Kefel's kingdom, his family, his life. Soon he would take his very essence. But as the priests completed their gruesome work, Ramses' triumph soured. The face staring back at him from the bandages was his own, stretched and distorted, a mockery of life. What had he become, and what had he unleashed within himself? When the last wrappings were in place and the sarcophagus complete, a hush fell over the chamber. Then Amenhotep, his face ashen, approached Ramses. "It is done," he announced, his voice hoarse. "The process is complete." The pharaoh's gaze, however, was not on the figure before him, but on the priests themselves, their robes stained with blood and natron, their tools smeared with the ichor of life. In their hands, the symbols of healing and rebirth had become instruments of torture and damnation. "You have served me well tonight," Ramses said, his voice echoing oddly in the vast chamber. "Your skills are a credit to your sacred order." The priests, startled by the praise, inclined their heads, their relief evident. They had feared the pharaoh's reaction, his madness a danger as potent as any curse. But now, sensing no trap, they bowed their heads in thanks. Their duty was done, and soon the great house would rise anew, drawing strength from the very essence of its enemies. But when Ramses turned back to the sarcophagus, his expression hardened. "See that he is kept safe," he commanded, his eyes flashing. "No one must disturb him. Until sunrise, let the guards take their vigil outside. Within these walls, only I shall enter." The priests, understanding the gravity of the command, nodded silently. They knew better than to question the pharaoh's whims, especially when they veered into the realm of taboo and sacrilege. Still, as they melted back into the shadows, their thoughts lingered on the prisoner within the tomb. Who was this Kefel, whose mere presence could so warp the pharaoh's commands? The priests wondered, their hearts heavy with foreboding. As the night wore on, the temple grew silent, save for the flickering flames and the ceaseless drip of resin. The hours crawled by, each minute stretching into an eternity. The silence was broken only by the distant toll of temple bells, marking the passing time and the slow march towards dawn. Ramses paced restlessly, his shadow stretching and contorting across the chamber floor. His mind raced, his thoughts a chaotic jumble of anticipation and dread. What did he truly seek to achieve? By communing with the dead, his victories over the Nubians had solidified his power, but also isolated him, turning him into an object of awe and fear rather than a beloved ruler. This last ritual, born from his obsession with immortality, threatened to consume him entirely. As the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, painting the eastern sky in hues of gold and crimson, Ramses halted his pacing. The moment of truth had arrived. Summoning the remnants of his composure, he approached the sarcophagus, his hand hovering over the cool surface of the stone. The priests, their faces etched with anxiety, watched their master intently. In the flickering torchlight, their shadows seemed to writhe and twist, mimicking the turmoil in their hearts. Was the pharaoh about to unravel completely, sacrificing his last shred of humanity on the altar of his own hubris? With a deep breath, Ramses pressed his palm against the sarcophagus, willing his pounding heart to silence. Closing his eyes, he reached out with his mind, seeking a connection with the enigmatic warrior within. He envisioned Kafal's spirit as a tempestuous force, wild and untamed, and he prepared himself to weather the coming storm. The world around him faded away, leaving only the pounding of his pulse and the faint echo of chanting from the depths of the temple. Ramses was about to embark on a perilous journey into the heart of darkness, where the boundaries of life and death blurred, and the only guide was the treacherous compass of his own soul. Little did he know that he was not the hunter, but the prey, and the spirit he sought to command would soon become his greatest tormentor. The sun dipped below the horizon, staining the sky with hues of dried blood and finality. For 3 days, the world outside the temple had dissolved into a sea of darkness, a fitting backdrop for the drama unfolding within its innermost sanctum. Inside, the air hung thick and heavy, a suffocating blend of incense, sweat, and something else, something sinister that spoke of life ebbing away and souls caught in the throes of terror. Wrapped in layers of linen, cocooned off from the world, Kafal lay suspended between life and death. His eyes, once blazing with the fire of conquest, were now dull orbs, staring sightlessly ahead, reflecting the flickering torchlight like a pair of hollow buttons. His lips, usually curled in a sneering smile, were pulled back in a silent scream frozen in time, a testament to the horror he endured in his final moments. His limbs, once powerful weapons wielded on the battlefield, were spread out at unnatural angles, pinned down by the unforgiving bandages, each rap another nail in his coffin, another step towards becoming a lifeless doll. Outside the chamber, the embalmers moved with a grim reverence, their hands shaking not from fatigue, but from the weight of what they were about to do. With trembling fingers, they applied the final touches, sealing the gaping wounds with molten wax, effectively entombing the still-living warlord, turning him into a human mummy, a walking corpse. Their faces, illuminated by the flickering lamplight, were masks of exhaustion and revulsion. They were artists of affliction, alchemists of agony, and their masterpiece was nearing completion. In the main chamber, Ramses watched with an unnerving calm. He sat cross-legged on a raised dais, his back straight, his eyes fixed on the proceedings. He was an unyielding monument of composure, his face betraying nothing of the turmoil raging within him. But behind his mask of regal stoicism, a storm was brewing, crashing against the banks of his resolve, like the Nile in flood. As the ritual continued, strange things began to happen. Visions flooded Ramses' mind, a torrent of images that played out like a funeral procession of Kefali's life. He saw the glint of sunlight on steel as the warlord cut down his enemies, heard the joyous laughter as he celebrated victories, felt the warmth of the sun on his skin as he basked in the adoration of his people. He saw the loved ones Kefla held dear, their faces etched with worry as they waited for his return from battle, their tears mixing with the dust of the desert. And he saw the inevitable end, the betrayal, the capture, and now this, his living in. With each passing moment, Kefla's essence flowed into Ramses, coursing through his veins like liquid gold, filling him with a heady rush of strength and power. But this infusion came at a terrible price. It was laced with the agony of a dying man, the despair of a betrayed lover, the anguish of a son mourning his father. It was a baptism in blood and shadow, and Ramses found himself both invigorated and haunted by what he had become. In the dim oil lamplight, his eyes glowed with an unearthly light, his face pale and drawn. He looked every bit the living pharaoh, yet there was something else in his demeanor, something unsettling that spoke of a soul wrestling with forces beyond its mortal ken. The embalmers finished their grisly task and backed away, their faces ashen in the flickering light. They had just completed their part in an abomination, and guilt and fear warred within them. The final steps were up to Ramses. Taking a deep breath, he rose from his seat, his movements stiff and ceremonial. He walked slowly towards the chamber, his eyes never leaving the figure swathed in bandages before him. This was the culmination of his plan, the payoff for all his scheming and maneuvering. And yet, as he gazed at the mummy before him, a chill snaked down his spine. He placed his hands on the warm linen, feeling the faint tremors that betrayed the captive will within. He could feel the essence of Kefel struggling against its bonds, a desperate bid to break free from the prison of flesh and shadow. There was a moment of stillness, broken only by the sound of Kefla's ragged breathing. Then Ramses began to chant, his voice deep and resonant, echoing with the weight of ancient power. He intoned the sacred words, calling upon the gods to witness this ritual, to sanctify this abomination. But even as he did, he could feel the disturbance in the force, the unnatural resistance that belied Kefla's fading strength. As the ceremony reached its crescendo, the bandages on Kefla's face were peeled away, revealing a visage of utter despair, a mask of terror frozen in time. His eyes, wide and vacant, stared sightlessly into eternity, robbed of the fire that had once blazed within them. His mouth hung open in a silent scream, a final, futile attempt to break the bonds that held him not only physically, but spiritually. Ramses stepped back, his heart pounding in his chest. Before him stood not just a mummy, but a spectre of death, a grim spectre that seemed to mock his hubris. In that moment, he knew he had crossed a line, had opened a door that should have remained firmly shut. He had delved into the darkest recesses of magic, and now the consequences were upon him. Amun-hotep, Ramses' vizier and chief priest, collapsed before the altar, his body betraying him after years of service. His shoulders slumped, his head lolling to one side, his eyes glazed over in death. He had seen many rituals in his lifetime, many dark arts enacted in the name of Mat and order, but none so disturbing, so profoundly unsettling as this. The mere sight of the living mummy before them had been too much for his frail human frame. He had given his all to the pharaoh, to the gods, and now death had come to collect its due, swift and unceremonious. He had failed Ramses, failed in his duty to the divine order, and the pharaoh's first thought was not of grief, but of his own position. Amun-hotep was right. He had gone too far. His quest to emulate the gods, to become immortal, had taken a terrible turn. The ritual was supposed to grant him eternal life, not this. His legs buckled beneath him, and he sank to the floor, his eyes wide with dawning horror. His breath hitched in his throat, and he gasped for air as a strange, suffocating sensation crept over him, sapping his strength, stealing his breath. The walls of the temple seemed to close in on him, the darkness pressing in from all sides, threatening to engulf him. In the fading light, he saw the living mummy stirring, its bandages shifting, its eyes glowing with an eerie light, and he realized with a jolt that he was not alone in this suffocating darkness. Kefel was not yet done with him. When Ankhesenaten emerged from the temple, she was met with a sight that turned her blood to ice. Before her lay the sarcophagus, a looming presence draped in black cloth, its surface adorned with scenes of Kefla's life and, more ominously, his death. The final image seared itself onto her retinas, the living mummy trapped within its stony confines, its bandages a shroud, its form forever arrested in a silent scream. She had known the ritual would be brutal, but nothing had prepared her for this. Her husband, her love, was being turned into a dead god, his humanity stripped away, his essence devoured by the insatiable maw of the afterlife. She watched as Ramses, his face drawn and haggard, stumbled out of the temple, his eyes vacant, his shoulders slumped. He looked like a man robbed of his soul, his vitality leached out, leaving behind an empty shell. She wanted to rush to his side, to offer comfort, to hold him, but her feet were rooted to the spot, her body frozen by a primal fear that gnawed at her insides. In that moment, she knew their marriage, their dynasty, their very existence was cursed, tainted by the abomination that had just transpired within the temple walls. Ramses ruled for a few more years, his body racked with pain, his legs weakened by the same bandages that had confined Kafel, his vision blurred, as if the world itself was swathed in linen, muffling the cries of his people, the pleas for mercy, the demands for retribution. He saw the faces of his court with growing detachment, their features melting into one another, their voices blending into a discordant hum. He was trapped in a gilded cage, his mind and body betraying him, his soul tethered to a dying pharaoh, cursed to walk the earth as a living corpse. Then came the end, as sudden and unexpected as it had always been inevitable. He died in his sleep, or perhaps it was in his dreams, the line between the two blurring in the final moments of his life. His tomb was filled with treasure, with gold and lapis lazuli, with ivory and ebony, but none of it could buy his absolution, his peace. The priests had done their duty, preserving his body, wrapping him in linen, coating him in resin and spices, but they could not staunch the flow of blood, could not erase the stain of what he had done. His mummy, when discovered centuries later, was found twisted in the same shape as when he had cursed Kafel, a chilling echo of the suffering he had inflicted. And so the cycle continued, the dynasty crumbling under the weight of its own hubris, falling prey to the same darkness that had consumed Kefale, bringing Egypt's glory to its knees before foreign invaders. The Nile kept flowing, though, carrying silt and secrets on its back, its waters ebbing and flowing, washing away the blood and the dust, but never the memory of the pharaohs who had dared to play God. In the windswept valleys of the kings, where tombs gaped like open wounds in the earth, the echoes of those screams lingered, a somber reminder of the cost of unchecked ambition, of the futility of trying to deny death, of playing God only to become a monster. And somewhere in the shifting sands, deep in the belly of the earth, the mummies slumbered, their forms preserved in time, their stories a whisper in the desert's vast silence. And among them, Kafel's wrapped form cocooned off from eternity, his eyes staring vacantly into the abyss, his eternal gaze a silent accusation, a reproach to the living for the sin of forgetting.